convene the meeting of the Jobs and Business Retention Committee. Item number 1.
We recommend Councilmember actually hearing item 1 and 2 together, if that's all right.
That's fine.
Okay. Item 1 is a CDD report in response to a motion Alarcon Garcetti relative to the impact of updating federal poverty guidelines to a self-sufficiency standard. And item number 2 is a CDD report relative to the development of a self-sufficiency index and implementation of a self-sufficiency standard and related matters.
Andy Chavez with the Community Development Department.
Michael Cole, Community Development Department.
We actually prepared 2 reports for the committee that were actually drafted a ways back, and some of the information may be dated, but we can nevertheless try and update as we speak. The issue at hand specifically was using a different method for determining program eligibility for our individuals, or for calculating the number of individuals that are actually living in poverty. There were 2 tasks that we undertook. One was to survey other city departments to determine what information or data they were using to determine eligibility for program clients. And secondly, we drafted an opinion of sorts on the use of a different self-sufficiency calculator for program eligibility. As it relates to the latter, in terms of our WIA programs, dollars for our adult participants and our youth participants are based on poverty data. So in terms of the awarding of additional funds, if we were to use a self-sufficiency calculator of sorts for determining eligibility, first of all, it would make a greater number of individuals eligible. That wouldn't necessarily impact us. Well, it would impact us from the perspective that it would increase demand. Currently, we estimate that we serve about 5% of the eligible population. So even if we identified more folks as being eligible, we wouldn't necessarily be able to serve more. But it would impact in terms of the formula dollars, how the formulas are calculated, to allocate dollars to the local areas. So given the poverty data is considered an awarding adult and youth funds, it's conceivable that a greater dollar amount would come to the city based on that data.
Okay. I'm reading the original motion, and the motion actually asks the Community Development Department to report on what the impact of updating the federal poverty guidelines to a self-sufficiency standard would have on city programs and services.
I can speak more to that if you'd like.
Okay.
Michael Cole, CDD. As part of that effort, we surveyed 14 city departments about a year ago. Of the 14 city departments surveyed, 10 of those use HUD guidelines for their low-income service eligibility requirements. 4 of the 14 surveyed use federal poverty guidelines, which are the HHS guidelines. So when you speak about whether adopting a self-sufficiency standard or changing the federal poverty guidelines, how that would affect the city, it's unclear at this point, because most city departments that we surveyed use the HUD guidelines, which wouldn't be affected by a change in the federal poverty guidelines, the HHS guidelines. I can give you an example of some of the departments that use those 2 guidelines and services they provide, if you'd like.
Thank you.
The HUD low-mod income guidelines used to determine service eligibility include Department on Disability, DWP, CDD, CRA, Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority, Housing Authority, City of Los Angeles, Housing Department, Rec and Parks. These agencies that use the HUD low-mod income guidelines provide services such as AIDS prevention, reduced utility rates for senior citizens, domestic violence shelter operations, low-income housing construction, homeless assistance, Section 8 public housing, homeownership assistance, youth recreation and nutrition programs. City agencies that use the federal poverty guidelines, HHS guidelines, to determine service eligibility include Department of Aging, LAHD, and CDD. These agencies that use the federal poverty guidelines provide services such as elder care and senior support, affordable housing through the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, youth employment services, financial literacy after-school programs, youth employment services, child care services through CDD's Human Services Delivery System. I have a specific example of a benefit if the federal poverty guidelines were changed, and that comes from LAHD.
Thank you.
If a self-sufficiency standard was adopted and the federal poverty guidelines were changed, the LAHD's applications for funding of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund and the Permanent Supportive Housing Program could be more competitive and could lead to funding that could be dispersed across a wider part of the city, further supporting the fair share of affordable housing dollars. Other city programs and services that
When you
utilize...
say it would be more competitive, what
well,
exactly?
Unfortunately, we don't have the housing department here, but my understanding from them a year ago when we prepared this report was that...
In other words, more people would compete?
Well, we would have a better chance of getting those dollars because we would show more poverty.
Oh, I see.
Than we
I
do
see,
now.
I see. Okay.
So that could be a potential benefit for those particular programs for that particular department.
Could we use this potentially new standard surgically so that we could use it where it would provide the most benefit?
We could use it where it would fit with how the programs are designed now and what they use. As I said when I started this, most of the departments...
For example, are the programs that are 100% federally funded based on those standards, but the federal government would have to agree to the new standard, correct?
Correct.
So without the federal change, it really wouldn't amount to anything.
Yes, the concern raised in these reports is that we would be able to identify clearer and more accurately who is in need, but without changing the federal guidelines and corresponding change in federal funding, we would be in the unfortunate situation of being able to identify more people in need, but being possibly unable to assist them. So,
I think that's exactly the problem.
yes.
But the whole notion of changing the federal guidelines on poverty really has to do with shedding a bright light on the realities of the condition of people in America, and to suggest that we are at 30% poverty or 23% poverty is really based on a standard that is outdated and inaccurate at best. So the suggestion is actually primarily focused on just shedding a bright light on what the condition of LA is.
Sure. We support updating the federal poverty guidelines.
But if they don't do it, what's to stop us from looking at it? Even though we may not be able to use it with regard to federal funds, why wouldn't we want to know what the condition of our communities is?
We would support using something like the Insight Survey or the FESS Self-Sufficiency Index to further clarify those residents in need here. So even though, as you said, it would shine a light on it, it would help us to further illustrate our need to the local, state, federal agencies. We would support that. The issue or the concern that comes up again and again as the research is done for these, as you well know, is that a change in adopting that self-sufficiency standard wouldn't necessarily address any funding. It wouldn't come with any funding per se necessarily. But you're correct. We would be able to clarify the need.
And interestingly, I think it was a week ago, the Census Bureau announced a modification of how they're accumulating statistics. Do you have information about that?
I have a cheat sheet.
You're the statistical guy for the department, I take it.
By default, he is.
By default.
I apologize. 1 second.
And Councilman, just for clarification, in workforce development, when we serve an individual, services are progressive. So the last service that is to be provided is training. And what we have used is the self-sufficiency calculator to enable individuals to qualify for training. So it's the last resort service in workforce development. So we do actually use it, and it makes an increased number of individuals eligible for those services, but nevertheless, it doesn't increase the number of persons that we can serve in total for the workforce development programs.
I understand that.
The Census Bureau put out this year a comparison figure. There's, if I could back up for a second, there's many different agencies that use many different formulas for measuring poverty, researching poverty, eligibility, etc. There's HUD, there's the Census Bureau, there's HHS. So the Census Bureau revised their calculations, and they found that 7 million Americans live in poverty more than the government's official figure. That's the HHS figure. So with the Census Bureau modifying the way they calculate poverty, 7 million more Americans they found were living in poverty than the official.
What was it they modified? Because I wasn't real clear on how they
It seems that they calculated medical costs, and they also drilled down more geographically, which is a concern with these outdated formulas, is that they don't take into consideration the regional costs for housing, child care, groceries, etc. So the Census Bureau attempted to, as an exercise, look at that a little closer. So they did find an increase in poverty.
What I am trying to accomplish here is, I'm not trying to say that if we increase the information that automatically 100,000 people are eligible for services we now provide that we have limited resources for. But what I am trying to do is get a good picture of what the true poverty level is in Los Angeles, and part of it is to sort of encourage the federal government to be more realistic in their approach. So I was very encouraged by the Census Bureau. I did meet with the Assistant Secretary of Commerce on this issue, and she was very friendly to the concept and the notion, but concerned about the ramifications and how dramatic they may be, and so am I. But at the same time, if every city did essentially an undercount of people of poverty or people who were self-sufficient, then the federal government would never get the message. So I think LA needs to be the first and needs to be very aggressive. Well, we're not going to be the first because I guess New York modified theirs to a standard that's somewhat less than the self-sufficiency standard, but nevertheless it's more than the federal poverty guidelines. So the point of this effort is really just to start collecting the data to be able to make those arguments when the time comes, because obviously to provide services to the increased population, it would require additional help from the federal government. But that would be my goal. I would hope that the county would also do some kind of assessment of the real issues of poverty. So I know that there's some fear in the department about well, if we change these standards, then is it going to increase demand? It is going to increase demand, but that's exactly how the political system works. If the demand increases, then hopefully we'll be able to be a little more clear with the federal government as to what our needs are, and the state government for that matter. So I really would like to move us forward. Is anybody collecting data on self-sufficiency?
Not to my knowledge, other than, as Manny Chavez explained, the Family Economic Self-Sufficiency Standard is currently being used for that particular unit. That's the Workforce Investment Board to assess whether clients qualify for more intensive training and services. So they're using this tool called the Family Economic Self-Sufficiency. That tool is also being used in over 30 states as of 2008 to determine self-sufficiency. It takes into account family size, family composition, the ages of the children, regional costs for housing, food, child care, health care, and transportation. So it is a broader, more accurate picture of need and self-sufficiency as a whole. So that tool, that particular tool, and others like them are being used throughout the country. I agree with you that simply being afraid of what the results might say should not stop us from moving forward with getting a better picture. And
So getting back to the original motion, the question was what if we did go to a different standard, what exactly would be the impact? I mean, what would it do to our HUD programs? What would it do to our housing programs, to our social service programs, even our crime programs? Would there be, that was actually the kind of analysis I was looking for.
it's unclear. We attempted to answer those questions, and I regret saying it's unclear because that's really not an answer. But what we found was that as you go down that road, you look at what people are using and the funds tied to what they're using. And mainly they're using HUD guidelines. A change in the HHS federal poverty guidelines would be welcome, and it would provide a clearer picture, but it wouldn't affect the majority of the city departments that use HUD funds. And HUD funds have their own requirements, their own eligibility status. So we could
drill down a bit on that? HUD low-income guidelines in LA, it says 60,560 used for many city programs. Could we get some specific examples?
The HUD guidelines?
Yeah.
For the departments that use the HUD guidelines?
Yeah, you have three standards here: the federal poverty guideline, the HUD low-income guideline, and the self-sufficiency standard. For
Yeah, so for the HUD low-income, the departments that use the HUD low-income guidelines, as I mentioned earlier, those are Department on Disability, DWP, CDD. There's 10 different departments out of the 14 survey that use the HUD guidelines, and they provide a variety of services. If we adopted a self-sufficiency index here in the city, we would get a better gauge for the level and depth and breadth of the situation. But if that wasn't tied to any funding, the concern raised in the report is that we would have a clearer picture, but then what do we do? How valuable a tool would that be other than that? And as you said, we could use that to go to the other local governments, state governments, federal governments to push the case here. So it's unclear because we could adopt that or a self-sufficiency index like that, but that wouldn't change the departments that use HUD now. That wouldn't impact the funding that HUD gives those departments to provide those services now. That would be a different effort to try to convert, modify, enhance, cajole.
But it would define our underserved population.
Yes.
The goal is
Which
there.
should give us some guidance as to our policies, the policies that we set forth. It may also have a district impact. 15 different council districts, maybe the resources that are divvied up might be council members might advocate for a different way to expend those dollars. But to not know at all, is sort of
one issue that I would raise or concern with using the FESS self-sufficiency is that as of 2008, that was broken out at the county level as the smallest. It's the Family Economic Self-Sufficiency Standard,
Okay.
which is self-sufficiency. So that's the one that's used in over 30 states now to determine self-sufficiency. The smallest factor that's broken down to is county. LA County is, as you know, is a huge area. So an issue raised if we adopted something like this is the ability to get further down to the city level, and as you said, even maybe the district level. That wasn't built into that particular standard as of 2008.
okay. Well,
Again, not that we shouldn't use that or something like it, but that was just a concern that was.
Now, what happened did you investigate the New York situation at all? I just have a
Yes,
feeling that you did.
they created a whole new, basically, department to run Mayor Bloomberg's Center for Economic Opportunity. So he and the nonprofits, the business interests, he created a commission.
And I just want to focus on the one thing they did to increase their guidelines relative to poverty.
They adopted the National Academy of Sciences guidelines,
Okay,
which were created in '95,
okay.
which geographically measure the cost of food, clothing, shelter, utilities, childcare, medical care, transportation, miscellaneous costs
Okay.
to determine. So they adopted the NAS guidelines.
And so what happened with the gap between what they were previously funding and what with the new numbers?
The gap went from 18% to 23%, and this newly created Center for Economic Opportunity, which was specially funded for this effort, went about prioritizing the deficiencies in the gap areas to address those.
How did they, so what are some, were they able to address any of them? I mean, how did they do it?
This report was done about a year ago. At that time, they had begun the effort to prioritize and identify and begin to implement some changes to the issues that they identified. I quite honestly haven't researched it further since then.
Yeah.
But they created a whole new
Unit.
department, basically, unit,
Department.
and funded it specifically for this task
Mhm.
to address that need.
Mhm. Well, I'm trying to, one of the responsibilities of this committee is to work to develop the master plan to end poverty in Los Angeles. And one of the things that has to be dealt with is the definition of poverty. And the current federal definition just doesn't meet any reasonable standards in terms of measuring, particularly the fact that it doesn't include for healthcare costs, and that's just one example. So how can we get to a place where we know we're collecting information about people who are short, for example, not the number of people who don't have healthcare in Los Angeles? I mean, how do we they may have a decent income, but if there's any kind of health-related catastrophe, they're sunk.
The city could adopt something like the Family Economic Self-Sufficiency Index to determine those kind of issues and and to try and answer those kind of questions.
I just want us to keep the data at this point. I'm not asking to move money. I'm not asking to throw more money, because obviously the people who do meet the federal standards are very poor. They're on the lowest rung. So to increase the federal poverty guidelines means that you're including in the group people who may be less poor, although they are not self-sufficient. So I'm not trying to take away money from people who have severe needs. I'm just saying that in order for us to develop a policy action plan to address the concerns of the poor, we got to know exactly what that condition is. And I'm thinking that CDD is the place where that data should be collected. And that's why I asked for this report. So I actually want more information about this group that is not being measured. Now, they may be served under the HUD standard to some extent, right?
Yes.
So I understand the direction you were going in. I would like for us to do a better assessment of the matrix of services that we do, and to what extent we're able to fulfill the needs, and then to what extent we can't fill the needs because we don't have this declaration of poverty, a poverty standard that works for Los Angeles. I mean, it's actually just a poverty standard that was concocted by somebody back in the 60s.
Yes,
A well-meaning
decades ago.
person, but
Yes.
I believe it was somebody in the Department of Commerce also, wasn't it?
It was created in '64 out of the Department of Agriculture.
Social Security Administration.
Yes, Social Security Administration.
Yeah.
So it's, very outdated and totally inadequate, I agree, for
Yeah.
measuring the need.
So what would be the next level of information we could gather here, if you were to take on that task?
We'd have to go back and investigate a little bit. We've done close work with the Economic Roundtable.
Could we just look at CDD, for example? Could we just
We have tons of data.
could we just do
We could
CDD
start
for now
there.
and another thing, for example, might be who is eligible for Department of Water and Power discount rates. I mean, so we think in terms of funding we may receive, but we are, that is a ratepayer system, and there are a lot of people who may be eligible if we define the standard differently. And so those are the kinds of things that I would like to know. Why should somebody pay the regular water and power fees when they qualify for the discount rates? If it were defined.
That was briefly touched on in one of the reports, and it was touched on as a concern that if that were to happen, that would impact the revenue for those departments that provide those kind of rebates. So there may be fiscal impacts, as everything has, with further identifying those individuals, qualifying them for the services they are qualified for, but there will be a fiscal impact at the back end for those departments. So, but it was briefly touched on the report. We could further.
Right now, I'm not talking about implementing anything. I just want the information, and I think the people of Los Angeles should know. And I hear these reports, and they always refer to the federal to the poverty rate. But the poverty rate is always the federal poverty rate, and that's not the best measure. And even the Commerce Department agrees with us there. In fact, their recent action is declarative that they agree that rate is outdated, and I think they would agree that it lacks usefulness. So I think we ought to do a better job of collecting information about those people who are not self-sufficient. And who nevertheless do not qualify for our programs because they don't meet that standard. But can we start with CDD and get a more detailed report from the programs that you serve? What exactly? I mean, who might be eligible for additional services, and if we were to provide those services, how much would it cost? And I mean, I just want the truth to be told. That I recognize we're not going to be able to change the system overnight. We're not going to be able to fund all these programs. I just think there's some value in knowing what's real, and I don't think anybody knows what's real out there. But I have to tell you, in districts like Councilmember Parks and myself, there's a lot of people who are right on that cutting edge, and they're not getting support that otherwise they should if we had a different definition. But that's something we have to address in the longer term. I'm not even asking the federal government to implement it immediately. It's something that's going to take some time to get done, and it's frankly not a high priority. But if we in order for us to develop the master plan, in order for us to make policy decisions, I think it would be helpful for us to know who are the people that are not able to make ends meet in Los Angeles. And it's certainly just not the group that falls in the federal poverty guidelines. So, by the way, I appreciate your candor, and I think you got a good sense of the direction I'm going in. But if we could just get the next level of review, and I know that you're busy with a whole bunch of other things, but I'd appreciate if you could go back and sharpen your pencil and come back with a little more detail on at least for the community development department, and then we'll go from there. I think we're most likely to find some success in actual implementation in DWP, but let's start with CDD for right now, because I just, as much as there may be programs in your purview that actually we might be able to change, but I recognize that we're not going to be able to do it across the board. It would be just too costly. So with that, I'd like to open it up for questions from my colleagues. Mr. Parks?
One of the things in reading the report that, and I see where people are trying to evaluate what the impact is, and the fact of whether we would basically have less money for larger groups of people. And one of the things I would hope that we would take on the similar stance as we're doing on the census, that we are talking about counting everyone, even out talking to the homeless, so because we clearly understand the connection between census federal funding and also representation. But internally, we shouldn't be reluctant to count or assess the full extent of poverty. And also what I'd hope that, which one of my complaints since I've been here is that sometimes we stand up every year around March and we basically look at the $80 to $100 million that comes in from block grant money because it's based on poverty. But often there's a real debate as to whether we spend it on eliminating poverty or do we spend it on maybe keeping programs alive that we basically have some connection to. And so I would hope that as we look at the definition and maybe move towards a better identification of the number of people in poverty, that there's an attachment to when poverty dollars come in, that money is spent in those areas where the poverty does exist. And again, I think when we, some of the stuff on the expending of our block grant money, you have to take, in some instances, a very strong look to see what the connection is. I mean, it might get the Housing Trust Fund may get some money, you might have money here, but in reality, do the people that get the advantage of the houses and the apartments and the cost of building them, is it really making poverty go away? Because in the years I've been here, every time we see one of your charts, poverty seems to be growing at the very time that the money for poverty is shrinking. And if we don't use it to the best of our ability, it will continue to grow. And I think that's the connection I'd like to see, that we get accurate figures, we come out with what our sense is. And again, federal government may never adopt it, but at least we'd have a better sense of where our funding should go and how we should be addressing it. And that's the disconnect that I see on, particularly when we look at some of the block grant. Where is it going? And it should be at the first level of poverty versus you have to kind of sit down and evaluate just how it's going to impact poverty down the line. I think that's what I'd like to see, those connections. But I think we need the same mentality on this evaluation as we do on the census, because there's a clear connection of what the census means. Sometimes it gets blurred as to what the poverty numbers mean, or whether the spending of the money to eradicate poverty gets blurred as to programs sometimes get in the way. And, I think it's those kind of things I think we could be much better as a city to look at, and it would drive us, really, if we had accurate numbers, it would drive us, I would hope, to spending money where there was the need, constantly with that as the hallmark. So that's what I'd like to see on it, because I think the definition, if it doesn't suit us, and it's like most federal definitions, you have some regional issues here that are different than other places, and they may disperse money in a certain way, but we shouldn't feel obligated we have to spend it in a certain way. And it's very similar to one of the issues we're dealing with in my district. We've had a couple of instances where people have been injured seriously because they are overpopulating a house, or they living in an unauthorized structure, and we generally find out about it when they burn up. And when you talk to building and safety and the fire department, they basically caution, walk lightly, because you might be creating more homeless people if you really take an active role on building and safety. And you say, well, then what we end up with is a couple of times a year we find out about it because somebody burns up because they're living in a garage with a candle, or they get asphyxiated because there's no ventilation. And the issue is, what's the balance? Is it better to know about the folks that are living in unauthorized housing and correct it and do it the right way, or do we just let it slide and act like they don't exist and then bury them 2 or 3 at a time? And I think that's what I'd hope we not do in looking at the poverty, is shy away from the real definition, for fear that the funding might be impacted, or the fear that there'll be more people than what we have money for. Because in reality, all you have to do is go out in the communities. Within the next couple of weeks, we'll go out on Slauson Avenue for the annual turkey giveaway, and there'll be people out there at 3 o'clock in the morning circling the block twice. So there's no mystery that there's a need. So the fact that we don't count them doesn't mean the need is going away. I mean, so that's what I'd hope we tie the two on a good definition and then a good connection with the spending.
And Council, we're confident that implementation of the family source model is one step in the right direction, and taking that to the larger con plan as a whole would be a great effort to undertake.
If I could express something that I've expressed before, but maybe I should say it again, and that is during the presidential election process, I sent a letter to now President Obama and asked if he would support a change in the federal poverty guidelines. And he responded with a letter in the affirmative, that he would absolutely support that. When I asked him about it at Miguel Contreras High School, he said that it's something he wants to do, but it is something that will take some time. It is not one of the top priorities. I mean, between the wars and the economic crisis, it's not something that is necessarily the top priority. And I'm willing to. I have no problem with that, because I never would have anticipated that we could change the federal poverty guidelines in a short period of time. It's going to take some time to do the adjustments. Not so much the calculation. That's easy. What is difficult is the ramifications of the calculation and making sure that you have control of those things. And that's why most advocates for changing the federal poverty guidelines articulate a course of 4 to 5 years in implementation. So, having said that, if our own president recognizes that the federal poverty guidelines are outdated, but it also sounded to me as if, it ain't going to get done unless there's a cry from the public. And that's why I think it's important for Los Angeles to cry out a little bit and say, hey, these are our numbers. If we did it differently, this is what would be affected, and this is how we could perhaps more effectively spend federal dollars to, as Mr. Park said, to actually solve the problems in some cases, because we've clarified the issue. So I think it's in our global interest to do these calculations, and to work with our advocates in Washington and Sacramento to let them know that we are calculating in these terms, because we don't think that their calculations address the real problems of the United States as they are in Los Angeles. And so I don't think the federal government is going to be opposed to our recommendation, or they're not opposed to the notion. They're concerned about the implementation, and some of our legislators, our congressional legislators, might also have that same concern. So I want to alleviate that concern, but at the same time, I want to collect the data so that we can continue to push the process. And when the time comes that the federal government might be maybe more flush with funds, they might be able to address the problem more appropriately. So that's the spirit of this. I'm not trying to say that we're not handling our money inappropriately. All I'm trying to say is that there's a population of need out there that is yet to be defined, and so we don't have a clear picture of our condition. And as policymakers, it's impossible for us to do a good job when the foundation of the data is flawed. And so we want to make better decisions. And while we don't have the resources to address all of those, the information that would come forth, I still think it serves a useful purpose for us to know what we have. It sort of reminds me of the emperor clothing. Somebody's got to say, hey, the emperor doesn't have any clothes on. And, our poverty programs are lacking. Somebody has to say that there's a whole population out there that is not being served. And I think Los Angeles can say that. I think New York made a bold statement in that regard by taking the steps that they took. And I think we should follow, and I think other jurisdictions should follow as well, and in that same path. And ultimately, we create the support necessary to enabled the President and Congress to do what they need to do to change it. Now, whether they change the federal poverty guidelines or whether they move administratively, as the Commerce Department did, it's a better situation. In fact, I don't think many people paid attention to the news of the Commerce Department's announcement of the recalculation, but I did, and I think it actually is going to have a dramatic effect on how policies are made moving forward from this point, from the point at which they made their announcement. So it's very good. But so this is consistent with that, and I don't think we're doing anything contrarian here. It's just a question of getting better information and building towards something that hopefully will pass within a short period of time. Mr. Kret?
Yeah, the only thing I'd add in pretty much in the same direction is that I think getting a real self-sufficiency number is an important first step, because then you have a sense of, if you actually had solved the problem, what would the solution look like? And we have this problem in a lot of areas of planning. We do our transit planning by which neighborhood yells the loudest and asks for a line. Nobody's actually said, okay, what does a built-out transit system look like? What's the solution look like? And then move towards it. I think this will enable us to do that by saying, okay, what are the poverty levels? Who is everyone in poverty? When we've solved this, what do we have to accomplish? And then we're moving in a more coherent way. So I think it's a great idea. It's an important first step, and at least we know what we're looking at. We know what our map is at that point and what our goal is.
Okay, so one of the other things, by the way, is if we set low standards for ourselves in terms of what is an acceptable income, then people won't be able to address the problems when they arise. If they think that making $40,000 a year is good, and a lot of people in our population, they think that salary is good. But $40,000, if you have one kid, you're going to be struggling in Los Angeles. And this is a way to also set a standard for the people of Los Angeles. To maybe you need to get more skills. Maybe you need to go to school and get more skills to upgrade your income, and that will be good for Los Angeles. But if you're saying, well, no, I'll be fine, not recognizing that in the long term you are going to have some kind of tragedy, you are going to have, because we all do, and it's going to cost you, and if you when you do retire, you can't rely on Social Security as your sole source of income, and so what are you going to rely on? But if we set the tone properly now, and sort of increase the information to the public about what is a self-sufficiency standard, what do you need to be earning at the age of 25, single, married, or with kids, how much should you be making? I think that's very important information that, for example, our LA Unified School District ought to be telling kids, if you want to own a home someday, you're going to need to earn this much money, and you're going to have to save X amount of dollars for a savings account, which means you have to earn that much more.
And if you have two kids, you want to have two kids in the house.
Exactly. If you want to have 12 kids, then, we need to have a talk. But the point is that I think it sets the tone. And as a society, honestly, given that we are now, a 65% rental society in terms of the households, we've set the bar very low. And people are meeting that goal. But it's not the society that I think we need to have. If we're going to rebuild our economy, we need to build it on good wages, not poverty wages. And if we have huge numbers of the population, as we do today, making $10 an hour, then we're gonna have to change the quality of life in Los Angeles. That's what's going to happen on the natural end. But if we teach people to aspire to $20, $30, $40 an hour jobs, because that's what they're going to need over the course of time, then we have a better shot. And those values are not. I don't think they do a good enough job in LA Unified to inculcate the children with that. that value. There is one anecdote that they talk about: if you graduate from college, you'll make $1 million more than if you graduate from high school. I'm not sure that's true today immediately, but over time it's supposed to be true. So the point is, I think by painting accurate pictures of the people who are self-sufficient, I think we also create an information flow that changes the culture of Los Angeles, so that people will demand higher wages, so that they will fight for health benefits, so that they will seek to protect their families by finding ways to bring more income into the household, because they know that making $30,000 with 4 kids is not self-sufficient, and they're going to have to find alternative ways to close that gap. Anyway, I want to thank you again for your presentation. I really appreciate it. I think we should continue the discussion, and we can maybe do it outside of these committee meetings to hone in on the kind of, to get closer to this data. My staff is available to work with you on that. And so if we can continue this for 60 days, hopefully in December we can come back with a little more information about CDD, and then we'll look at the other departments from that point.
Certainly.
Okay. Do we have any public comment cards?
No public comment cards.
No public comment? Nobody wants to say anything? Oh, I do have a letter that I should. Let's see. That's a little lengthy, so let me just say it comes from Jenny Chung, the attorney program manager for the Insight Center for Community Economic Development. It does say that, let's see, let me get to something here. Obviously, the Insight Center is in support of changing the federal poverty guidelines, but they have their own measures, and they will continue to work with us. They do support our efforts. So I'll just read the last couple of paragraphs. How's that? Why are these comparisons important? It shows that by using federal poverty guidelines and HUD low-income guidelines, we do not really know the extent of poverty in Los Angeles or anywhere else in the county for that matter. It also shows that our local, state, and federal policymakers do not have the accurate tools they need to most effectively target poverty prevention resources, which is particularly essential in tight economic times. Since 1996, the Insight Center has released, updated, and advocated for the Family Standard and Elder Index, which are used by a number of departments and agencies in the city of Los Angeles, including the Community Development Department and the Area Agency on Aging. As suggested in the Community Development Department's August 29, 2008 report in response to Council File whatever, the Family Standard and Elder Index can be used to access additional funding for city programs. Some organizations, including Los Angeles, some organizations use that standard, and it helps them get more funds. I'm sort of expediting here. So they're in support of this. Again, we all have the same purpose in mind. I appreciate Mr. Park's comments that they're right in line with the purpose of this. We want to shed a bright light on our inefficiencies, our problems in our society, and that helps us as policymakers make better decisions to affect positive change. So with that, I want to thank you again, and if nobody else has any comments, we will adjourn this meeting. Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, we had item 3.
Item 3.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
We're not adjourning this meeting. I take that back.
Item 3 is a motion, Alarcon Reyes, relative to the feasibility of implementing a citywide web-based low-income service enrollment system. Felipe Chavez is here from CLA for report.
Good afternoon, Felipe Chavez with the CLA's office.
Okay.
Before you today is a report in response to your motion relative to a citywide implementation of OneEApp. On July 10, 2009, the council authorized $200,000 in ERA funds for CDD to enter into a sole source contract with the center to promote healthcare access for initial OneEApp implementation. Initial implementation consists of phases 1 and 2, which include the purchase of OneEApp and integration of CDD's program eligibility rules. Phase 3 would be citywide implementation. Based on information provided by CDD, we are recommending expansion of OneEApp to other city departments. We also have CDD representatives and the Senator here to answer any questions.
Well, we announced the use of OneEApp. I think we wanted to sort of hone in on what programs. Right now, the CDD is not currently using OneEApp.
No, we're not. Manny Chavez with CDD. We actually
Give us sort of a how we get from where we are today to the final process.
Stepping back a little bit, the authority to actually execute an agreement with the OneEApp administrators was granted by council way back in June. It was subject to our receiving CSBG ARA dollars from the state. Proud to announce that those dollars were actually received today, so we do have the actual authority to spend funds. We spent the last few months negotiating the actual terms of the agreement with the contractor. We're just about there. We should literally execute within the next week, and then we'll be able to actually roll out. The plan is, and as you're aware, we have funded 21 family source centers. So the proposal is to start training our city-managed family source center staff, of which there are 5 sites, to actually use the system. We've actually put new computer hardware and software at those sites, so they're ready to take the OneEApp application and to make that available to their participants.
Okay.
So we want to do a train the trainers, where our staff will be trained on how to use the system, and then to train their other staff members, and then ultimately to train the users of the system so that they can access it on a self-service basis.
The users of the system being
I'm sorry?
the agencies?
The 5 of the sites are actually managed by the city, so we're going to start with those sites, and then in December we're going to train the 16 nonprofit family source center staff on how to use the system.
Okay. And in terms of what services will be part of the application process, will there be any city services included by December?
No, not initially. It will be everything that's currently in the OneEApp system.
Could you just, for the benefit of this committee, could you just say a few of the groups that are included in the one application process?
Yeah, I'm happy to do it. I'm Bobby Wilbur from the Center to Promote Healthcare Access. The programs that are in there now are Medi-Cal, S-CHIP, which is in California known as Healthy Families, food stamps, CalWorks, which is otherwise known as TANF. There are a number of other programs that families will be eligible for, most of which kind of are either WIC, they're kind of food-related programs, or they're health-related programs, and then we also have some earned income tax credit and child care
Okay, so the
tax
point
credit.
being that they can go to anyone, eventually the goal is at any one of these family source centers or the agencies affiliated with the family source centers, they will be able to fill out one application and qualify for all the programs they are eligible for in one application. So I want to get a better sense of the implementation. So we are as of December, we will be able to do that with our family source centers. Those are the city-run family source centers.
Correct.
Now, the agency-run nodes, there's 16 of which they will be ready to go by
In December, because the training will be in
December
early
as well.
December. Yes.
Okay. So our agencies are going to be, I thought it was December.
November.
November. Okay, so in November, and then in December the outside agencies, and then the collaborative agencies. Would that include all the collaborating agencies?
Correct. The expectation is that even the other 40 smaller nonprofits that we're going to be funding through the specialized services RFP, those are all expected to participate in
Will be
OneEApp.
trained up in OneEApp use. Now, the city departments, in terms of what we can incorporate into the OneEApp, would include CDD, of course, but what other departments are we talking about?
The year one discussions are to look at DWP, and then potentially there is a list of other city departments or programs that we can incorporate into the system. If you want.
Okay.
Right. Some of these departments include the Department of Aging, which they have the Older Worker Training Program, or the Project CARE, Bureau of Sanitation with low-income source service charge, CDD, DWP, LAHD, Recreation and Parks and Transportation.
Okay, so we hope to get their, I guess, questions into the application by December of next year? Or
That would actually
November?
be a year or two discussion, because the dollars that we've incorporated are for them to build the capacity to incorporate our workforce, one source, and family source eligibility criteria into the system this year, and then to look at DWP this year as well.
Okay. Well, are there any other agencies that need to be incorporated that beyond the city's departments? Are we going to do it department by department? Are we going to try to do it all in one fell swoop?
It's probably a workload issue that I would defer to the expert on.
I mean, we can do it however the city decides, but traditionally, it's easier to kind of take one department, take all of their
So, for example,
programs, and kind of
the
move them through the
low-income
process.
program at DWP. And they don't have a whole bunch, so they might be, and we also might want to be looking at the greatest impact to the users. So we have to decide which to prioritize, and then maybe go department by department. I would agree that would probably be a better approach. And then we could make the announcements as they go.
Exactly.
And people would have the right focus. So when we get aging on board, we can make that announcement. When we get DWP on board, we make that announcement. When we get sanitation on board, we make that announcement. So, so I would concur. If we do that, we might be able to get up to speed, with different departments before next December, before the following December, I should say. So,
We have actually, we have a recommendation here for the CAO to kind of coordinate this effort.
okay.
And to work with all of the departments, with the assistance of our office and the CDD, to coordinate with each department and see which programs would qualify to be integrated into the OneEApp.
Okay. Well then, would you like to read the recommendations of the staff?
Sure. We have 4 recommendations, and recommendation number 1 is to instruct the CAO, with the assistance of the CDD, CLA, and other city departments, to review and report to council in 60 days on the cost associated with expansion of OneEApp to other city departments, including configuration and development, training and support, maintenance and implementation, and to report on city resources, including development of subject matter expertise, preparing eligibility rules, developing program text, languages as required by the city, and related city responsibilities. Recommendation number 2 is to instruct the CAO, with the assistance of CDD, the CLA, and other city departments, to report on a strategy to expand OneEApp to other city departments, including contracting recommendations. Recommendation number 3 is to instruct the CAO to explore any efficiencies that could be gained by partnering with other local entities currently implementing OneEApp, such as Los Angeles Unified School District and Los Angeles County. And recommendation number 4 is to instruct CDD to report on the status of phases 1 and 2 in 60 days.
Okay. Are there any questions?
Just move those recommendations.
Okay, that's fine. Is there any public comment on this matter? No, I think those are good ways to go, but my recommendation would be that we look at doing it department by department and prioritizing those in some kind of order, so that we can get the services out as quickly as possible. Also, we have to look at revenue. So, for example, it may be easier for us to do it in specially funded functions or revenue generating departments rather than other departments as a priority during these tough economic times. So I would ask that we prioritize in that way. But with that, then I don't hear any objections to approving this motion and having the department report back in 60 days to this committee and work with my staff on scheduling. So that matter is approved.
So will it be the recommendations CLA gave, plus prioritization, deployment, department by department?
Yeah, you can put that in there, sure. Okay, thank you very much. Now is the meeting? Now we may adjourn the meeting. Thank you. Sorry. Write it down. Great.